Well, President Trump has taken a beating in terms of his job approval ratings, and it's really two phenomenons or two dynamics that are at play. On one side, you have the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, which obviously made a lot of people unhappy and frustrated and agitated, given the long lines in airports and TSA not functioning as it would have. And Republicans are bearing the majority of the blame for that shutdown. Voters clearly tie it to the excesses of the anti-illegal immigrants push that the administration led with at the beginning of the year in January in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and in Minnesota. So the Republicans are still taking the majority of the heat for that shutdown. And then on the other side, you have the engagement in Iraq, the strikes that the United States and Israel have undertaken against the Islamic regime in Iran. And really, that created a boomerang effect in terms of fears around the economy and concerns around the economy. These fears and these concerns have also hit President Trump's support with core groups like GOP voters, middle-aged voters, even younger voters, which he had started to inch up with again. We've seen fairly significant mid-single digits to high single-digit decreases. And if you take that all together, really, it led.
That was Dritan Nesho, the man whose firm called two consecutive presidential elections more accurately than almost any other pollster in America. When he says Trump is taking a beating, he's not editorializing. He's reading the numbers. Here's the situation as of this poll. Trump sits at 43% approval. That's down 3 points from February alone. But what makes this particular slide dangerous isn't the headline number. It's where the erosion is happening. It's happening inside his own coalition. GOP voters pulling back, middle-aged voters pulling back, young voters who Trump spent months courting, pulling back. And the driver behind all of it is one word: Iran. The war began without a primetime address. It began without a clear set of publicly stated goals. Trump struck first, explained later, and the economic consequences arrived faster than any justification did. Gas hit $4 a gallon for the first time since 2022. The stock market posted its worst levels of the year. And the White House is now watching its approval bleed out on two fronts simultaneously: a war abroad and an economy at home that voters are increasingly convinced is moving in the wrong direction. Other polls confirm what HarrisX is measuring. Reuters, Ipsos has Trump at 36%. A Fox News survey recorded his highest disapproval rating of either term. The data is not part.
Well, look, I mean, I think that fighting crime, he's at 47% approval, so he's doing better than his average. Returning America to its values, he's at 47% approval. That's obviously a broad interpretation of what that means. Immigration, he's at 46% approval. All of these areas are above board. But when you look at handling inflation specifically, he was at 44% approval in February. He's at 38% now. So he's taken a 6 point hit within the span of about 3 to 4 weeks. When you look at managing the Iran conflict, we haven't been trending this, but we introduced it after the war. He's at about 41% job approval. Foreign affairs, in February, he was at 45%. He's down to 41% overall. And then in a similar picture, when you look at the economy, he was at 45% approval in February, and he's down now to 40% approval. So we see decreases effectively across the board, and a lot of the fears are driven by inflation, by the economy, by the direction of the country. And as I mentioned, we've seen some notable decreases also amongst GOP voters, which are his base, 18 to 24-year-old voters, and then also in terms of 35 to 44-year-old voters, which still continue to have the 54% approval of Trump and his policies overall, but there's a fairly significant decrease from last month within that group as well. So again, the economy is flashing yellow, not red, but it's flashing yellow, even though, as we'll talk about in a bit, the Iran issue or support for the Iran engagement is really split at 50-50. And the president has more political capital to spend on sustaining that effort. In part, that's why he went and made his Oval Office speech, right? To prop up support and to really rally support.
Partisan at this point. It is directional. And the direction is down. 6 points on inflation in 3 weeks, 5 points on the economy, 4 points on foreign affairs. Those aren't rounding errors. Those are structural shifts. And Nesho buried the most important detail in a phrase. The economy is flashing yellow, not red. That's the kind of careful language a pollster uses when he's trying not to panic anyone, while the dashboard is lighting up. Here's what that yellow light actually means in political terms. Trump owns this economy. The poll says 62% of voters consider it his economy now, not Biden's. And 53% say it's performing worse than it did under Biden. That's a 5-point reversal from just 1 month ago, when 53% said the opposite. The Iran war was supposed to project strength. Instead, it closed the Strait of Hormuz, spiked oil prices, and handed voters a very simple and very damaging equation. Trump started a war, gas went up, my costs went up, and I am worse off. That equation doesn't require a policy briefing to understand at the pump. The administration is tracking this closely, Nesho said so directly.
To win the conflict and steer it in the right direction. But they're not clear on the goals, and that's when you ask a question like, what is closer to your views? Should we push for victory in Iran, meaning the full elimination of their nuclear program, ending their ballistic missile programs, and their support for terrorists, which is as close to a set of goals and a justification as the administration has provided? Or should the administration seek a compromise that doesn't achieve these goals and ends the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz to trade? They're split 49-51, right? And in part, that's because they understand that pulling back right now without finishing the job is dangerous, but they also don't have a clear picture of what success means on the other end. So, simply put, how this conflict will be viewed or this engagement will be viewed will depend on what the off ramp is and whether or not voters perceive that as a success. If voters perceive that as a success, then Trump wins and the Republicans are back on track ahead of the midterms. If they don't perceive it as a success, if the war comes to an abrupt end or comes to an end without clear wins and clear goals against those wins, then it will be seen as a failure. And again,
Is another week the economic pressure compounds. The yellow light Nesho mentioned is not staying yellow. Let's put the full picture together, because the data tells a story the White House would rather voters not connect. Trump entered 2026 with approval ratings in the mid-40s. He launched a war in Iran without a primetime address, without a defined exit strategy, and without clearly telling the American public what victory would actually look like. The economy, which he had spent months crediting himself for, got hit by the direct consequence of that war. Oil prices climbed. Gas crossed $4. Grocery costs followed. And now 62% of voters hold Trump personally responsible for an economy that 53% say is performing worse than it did under Biden. That 5-point reversal, from 53% saying things are better to 53% saying they're worse, happened in a single month. That is the fastest single-month collapse of economic confidence in this administration's history. The DHS shutdown added more weight. Airport lines, missed flights, federal workers going without paychecks for weeks. Voters blamed Republicans 53-47. And a Senate deal to fix it collapsed because the White House didn't get behind it, and the House Freedom Caucus walked. Nesho was careful with his language throughout this interview. He said yellow, not red. He said split, not broken. He said time remains. But the aggregate of what he described, a president losing his base on the economy, losing independence on the war, watching his numbers fall across every single policy category measured, that's not a warning. That's an indictment of a political strategy that bet everything on a war it hasn't yet explained. The midterms are in November. The off-ramp on Iran does not exist yet, and the voters who handed Trump his second term are the ones now driving the decline. Stay informed, think critically. If this breakdown gave you something the cable networks aren't telling you, share it, subscribe, and leave your take in the comments. The data is out there. Someone has to read it.
Let's talk about the economic consequences of this conflict a little bit. Oil prices have skyrocketed. Gas prices have certainly gone up. They hit $4 for the first time since 2022. And as of right now, according to this poll, 32% of voters say the economy is on the right track. 45% of voters are saying their personal financial situation is declining. Talk to us about these numbers because they don't really paint a rosy picture of how people view the economy right now.
No, I mean, as I mentioned at the outset, the president has taken a hit even in the economic perceptions of GOP voters, and especially with independents. If GOP voters have fallen in the mid to high single digits in terms of their confidence metrics on the economy, on the direction of the country, whether or not they're better off right now than they were, a month ago, then for independents, those figures reach into the low double digits, right? And that's a dangerous situation, especially before the midterms. Simply put, the Trump administration owns the economy. 62% say that it's their economy rather than Biden's economy. 53% this month said that the economy is worse than it was under Biden, which is a 5-point shift from February, where about the same number, 53% say that it was used to say that it was better than it was under Biden. A full, 6 in 10 voters say that the economy is shrinking rather than growing. A similar picture, even higher actually, 71% of voters today say that inflation is above 3% a year right now. So the mood is a pretty dour mood. And while the Democrats haven't offered an alternative or a better alternative, and voters recognize that, they still, on aggregate, trust Trump and the Republicans to manage the economy more than they trust Democrats. That number is 53% compared to 47% who trust Democrats. All of the indicators month over month shifted again on the low end in the mid single digits and on the higher end in the low double digits in the direction of concern, of fear, and of really feeling instability and maybe feeling even the costs at the table. And so this is something that the administration has acknowledged. They are tracking very closely. And again, this is the pressure point on this engagement. It's really voters' confidence in the economy and the American economy more than it is, the fight.
Which means they already know the yellow light is there. The question is whether they can turn it off before November. That paradox is the political trap Trump built for himself. Voters believe America is winning the fight. They do not believe America has defined what winning means. Nesho put it plainly. The administration has been deliberately ambiguous, treating this as an opportunistic, open-ended process that works militarily in the short term. It is catastrophic politically in the medium term, because when there are no defined goals, there is no defined victory. And when there is no defined victory, any exit looks like a retreat. CNN found that only 1/3 of Americans believe Trump has a clear plan for Iran. Only 1/3. The Silver Bulletin polling average, which aggregates dozens of surveys, now has just 38% of Americans supporting the war overall, with 55% opposed. The MAGA base is holding for now. Nesho confirmed that over 9 in 10 MAGA voters are backing Trump on this engagement. But even that base is eroding. YouGov data shows GOP support for Trump's handling of Iran has dropped 15 points in 5 weeks. That is not a blip. That is a coalition beginning to ask a question it wasn't asking a month ago. And the midterms are in November. Every week the war drags without a clear off-ramp,